international community's alarming silence about the issue. We are joined today by a very distinguished panel of experts from whom we will hear insights into the dire situation on the ground, as well as potential avenues through which we can support amidst this humanitarian catastrophe. My name is Insia Raja, and I will be moderating the panel today. Welcome, everyone. I believe we can start with Chris Gunness, who will be joining us early on, but he might be speaking, so we can have him second, I guess. Yeah, if we can start with Zahir, that would be really, really good. Zahir Laher from South Africa.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Insia, for the kind invitation and inviting us to reflect on South Africa's views on the situation in Gaza. Today marks the 152nd day since 7 October 2023. Since then, about 1,130 Israelis and over 30,000 Palestinians have been killed, of which 12,300 are children. That is over 200 people a day. As South Africa stated in the United Nations General Assembly a few days ago, when is it enough for the world to finally accept that far too many innocent lives have been lost? When do we say, is it time to end this unjust killing? When do we demand a ceasefire? Do some of us want to continue to believe that we need to allow Israel more time to justify its so-called right to defend itself against the population it illegally occupies? When will this stop? This war has clearly shown that for some people, some lives mean more than others. There appears to be an Orwellian justification that some are more equal than others, and therefore some countries are above the law and cannot be sanctioned or stopped from their merciless persecution and genocidal acts. In the context of the violations of international law, South Africa resorted to international judicial mechanisms, including at the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, to seek justice for the people of Palestine. So as you're aware, we applied to the International Court of Justice as a state party of the Genocide Convention, where we put forward the case that Israel as a state party is violating the terms of the convention. So on 26 January of this year, the court ruled that South Africa's claim that the state of Israel, which is, as I said, a state party to the Genocide Convention, the court found that the case had met the standard of plausibility and ordered Israel inter alia to take action to prevent and punish genocide, incitement to genocide, and to enable the immediate and effective provision of basic services and humanitarian assistance to the besieged people of Gaza. These provisional measures were issued by the court to prevent irreparable and irreversible harm to the rights of Palestinians pending the court's final decision on the case. Regrettably, Israel has not complied with the court's binding order, but has instead escalated its acts against the Palestinian people. On 15 February, following a letter to the court from South Africa in response to Israel's threatened assault on Rafah, the court reminded Israel that the perilous situation in Rafah demands immediate and effective implementation of the provisional measures that the court ordered on the 26th of January. We regret that a month after the provisional measures were issued by the court, Palestinians continue to suffer immeasurably under the occupying power's intensified military operations. We want to reiterate that the provisional measures of the court are directly binding on Israel, which is required pursuant to the court's order and to the Genocide Convention to stop all acts by it that are plausibly genocide. There is clearly no credible basis for Israel to continue to claim that its military actions are in full compliance with international law, including the Genocide Convention. Similarly, in its attacks on civilians, we've stated that, and by taking hostages, South Africa has clearly stated that Hamas has also violated international law and must be held accountable for these actions. We reiterate our call for the immediate release of all hostages. As you may be aware, yesterday South Africa approached the ICJ with an urgent application for the provisional measures that the court ordered on 26 January 2024 to be strengthened to prevent a catastrophic famine in the Gaza Strip. This is in the context of what is occurring, particularly in Rafah. The urgent application has been necessitated by widespread starvation in Gaza, which has claimed the lives of at least 15 children in the past week alone, with the actual numbers believed to be much higher. UN experts, as we've heard in the recent days, have warned that the number of deaths will increase exponentially unless military activities are halted and the blockade is lifted. We want to stress, as I conclude my intervention, that the international community cannot proclaim the importance of international law and the UN Charter in some situations and not in others, as if the rule of law only applies to a select few. For international law to be credible, it has to be uniformly applied and not selective. So I want to conclude by saying that the events of the last month must awaken us to the urgent need for a negotiated settlement towards a two-state solution, which the international community has recognized through numerous UN resolutions. And ultimately, this should allow for the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people to be realized. So I thank you again for allowing us this opportunity to address you, and we're willing to engage further with the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is really great to hear, of course, from someone from South Africa, as you know, South Africa leads the way in international law. And I would just like to invite Chris Gunness, who was the former chief spokesperson for UNRWA, to address us next. Mr. Gunness.
Thank you so much for inviting me onto this distinguished panel. And thank you so much for the opportunity to bring the panelists up to date with the defunding of UNRWA, which is, I think, where I can really add to this debate. As you all know, after the ICJ ruling on provisional measures on the 26th of January, the Israeli government basically splashed across the front page of the New York Times, which is a willing mouthpiece for all this, accusations against 12 UNRWA staff members. Accusations were made against them, but there was no evidence, there was no proof. However, as a result of that, 18 donors defunded UNRWA, and they took with them $500 million. Now, I would argue, as have others, that this was a direct violation of the ICJ's provisional measures. They were very clear that no member state could take any measures to restrict humanitarian aid. And what did these donors do? Pretty much, within the next 36 hours, they all decided to defund UNRWA at a time when there was clear evidence that children were beginning to starve to death, and at a time when the UN itself was saying that over 500,000 people were in starvation. So what has happened is that there was a great deal of both private and public advocacy. Last Thursday, the European Union announced that it would be resuming its funding, that it would send the first tranche of 82 million euros, 50 million euros to UNRWA immediately. And since then, the UK has announced that it intends to refund. David Cameron has said that the decision to defund was too hasty, as he put it. And we've got indications that Canada and perhaps the Australians and others are now going to follow suit. So that's good news. For me, one of the big takeaways is that this effectively was the mother of all lies. And looking back at what happened, I think we have to draw some conclusions here. I was the UNRWA spokesman in 2014 during that war, which frankly, this present conflict dwarfs that. But the fact is that every time the Israelis hit one of our schools, killing dozens of people, the Israeli spokespeople would say to journalists, there were militants inside the schools, that's why we had to take action, even though that clearly wouldn't justify killing women and children, civilians. But nonetheless, these lies were spread. It wasn't until the conflict ended that UNRWA mounted a board of inquiry, was able to investigate, and sure enough, in all 7 cases where of the UNRWA installations that were hit, there was no evidence that there were militants in our schools. And I suppose what I would like to conclude, and to really the main point I want to make is that not only were the donors who defunded complicit in violations of the Genocide Convention and the provisional measures, I think there should be accountability. I think we should ask questions of the donors that they have asked of UNRWA. What are the mechanisms in these donor communities which ring fences humanitarian decision-making from political influence, just as they're saying to UNRWA, your humanitarian work must be immune from political influences? Well, I think we have to ask those questions. We have to ask questions about what the British government, the Canadian government, the Australian government, all of the governments that defunded, what was the evidence? On what basis did they take a decision to defy the International Court of Justice and to put themselves in a position where they were complicit in violations of the Genocide Convention and violations and complicit in starvation? And then the third series of questions I think we should ask is of the journalistic community. Why is it that the journalists were so willing to promulgate stories, to put out stories which basically were unproven, which were against UNRWA staff members, which were so damaging, not just against the agency? So UNRWA's going through its worst existential crisis, perhaps in its 75-year history, but on the ground, it has led to a situation where there is starvation. UNRWA has 1.2 million people on its food distribution lists. That has risen exponentially since the 7th of October. And I think we have to ask some serious questions about what the journalists and how the journalists operate. It seems that there's one series of editorial standards which relate to accusations against the Palestinians, and another series of editorial standards that apply when it comes to accusations against the Israelis. So, that is the update. I pray that these donors who defunded UNRWA will realize that they are on the wrong side of history, that they believe the mother of all lies, and on the basis of that, they took decisions which are violations of the Genocide Convention and which make them complicit in starvation. There I will end. Thank you very much for listening. And as I say, it's an honor to be able to address this group. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It is always really, really great to hear your insights, especially regarding UNRWA. And I would like to invite Dr. David Monnier to join us. And just before we do, if it would be okay, may I just ask the speakers once to turn on their cameras just for a few seconds, if possible, and then turn it off. That would be great.
Good evening. Let me take this opportunity to thank the organizers. We watch what's happening in Gaza with utter shock and disbelief in terms of the number of people that are dying on a daily basis, innocent women and children not involved in the conflict itself in one way or another. And so much has been said in terms of the case, the ICJ case, and events within Gaza itself. My previous panelist has alluded to the defunding issue. But the other question that is with us is the question around the international system itself. To what extent has Gaza exposed the declinings of the entire United Nations system, and more so the international liberal international order? And the bigger question that we are asking, given the double standards in the manner in which human rights is understood, practiced, and policies implemented, particularly by Western countries, Gaza has demonstrated quite clearly that we live in a parallel world order, a world of Western countries with certain set of norms and values that are not in line with a majority in the global south. And we are of the view that with the events in Gaza and so many, particularly on the African continent, where the very same standards are applied, the war in Ukraine is viewed, understood, and reported differently from what's happening in Gaza and these conflicts that I've mentioned. It's bringing us all to a realization and the need to firstly strengthen, unite the voice of the global south, and more importantly, to reopen some of the core issues, the lack of transformation of the entire international order, that there is a need of transformation and reforms at United Nations, including the exercise of the veto power. As it stands, United States abuses the veto. We've seen on 2, if not 3 occasions, United States has vetoed and taken particular view that is quite strange, not in line with what it preaches in terms of the respect of human rights, as it does on Ukraine. It also has demonstrated to all of us that we are not equal before international law, and therefore there is a need to expand the entire United Nations Security Council to ensure that there's equal representation of countries in the Middle East, on the African continent, Latin America, and Asia. And far beyond that, the practice of not just United States, the government, the media, scholars in the Western world, and the manner in which they have responded has also brought us more questions than answers, that they continue to look the other side. And one should not generalize. There are a number of scholars in the Western world that are pro-human rights, and they have been supportive on this particular issue. But the most influential scholars, many of them have been champions on the promotion of human rights. Some activists within Hollywood, actors who have been championed when it comes to Darfur, when it comes to a number of conflicts, who preach human rights, democracy, are nowhere to be seen. So I think the main message coming from the global south, in Africa in particular, is that we are watching. We are calling upon all scholars, the elites, to make their views heard. And in doing so, it is not a matter of supporting only the Palestinian. We support a 2-state solution where the Israelis and the Palestinians live side by side with equal rights and decent livelihood. And in these discussions such as this, we call on the international community, as we did during the anti-apartheid, as we did during the colonial era, that we cannot rest until people of Palestine are free, people in Western Sahara are free, and so many other who are under colonial rule to be free, in line with United Nations Human Rights Charter, United Nations norms and values that we all aspire to. I end my presentation on this note. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. I would like to invite next Jeff Halper, who is an American anthropologist, author, and political activist, to speak to us next.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm actually an Israeli anthropologist, but living here in Jerusalem. But thank you for inviting me to this important panel. Of course, all our attention is on Gaza and the genocide that is happening there, and that's appropriate, and it's good that that's the focus of the discussions here. But we have to also understand that Gaza is a part of a wider settler colonial enterprise of Zionism in Palestine in general. And that while Gaza, the attack on Gaza since October 7th has risen, and the South Africans, I think, have shown this in the ICJ, to the level of genocide. In fact, it's really a peak of what we might call a process of slow genocide or incremental genocide that's been going on certainly since 1948, even 1947, but certainly with roots well beyond that. You know, the Zionist forces helping the British, for example, in the Great Revolt of 1936 to repress Palestinian resistance as well. So I think we need that wider perspective. And we have to understand, you know, the idea that Zionism is settler colonialism has become, I mean, the good news is that's become a very popular, you know, it's broken through the academic barriers and it's become a part of the popular discourse. The problematic with it is that it's not really understood. And sometimes it's used more as an accusation, simply a standalone Zionism instead of colonialism, and now it's bad, and we simply move on, instead of really imparting to people the importance of the concept. It means something. And genocide is built into settler colonialism. Settler colonialism, especially, not every, maybe, really in every source of settler colonialism, how it's expressed, of course, depends on how large the indigenous population is, the colonized people, and how much they can resist and what their national aspirations are. But certainly in the case of Zionism, the elimination, the erasure of the Palestinian people is built into the Zionist project. In other words, Zionism came to Palestine with the intention of taking it over, of transforming Palestine into Israel, transforming an Arab country into a Jewish country. And the only way that could be done in a country that was populated by another people was to deny their very existence. Until today, Israel, even with Oslo and all the other negotiating processes, Israel has never, ever recognized the existence or the national rights of the Palestinian people. So their existence as a people are denied. And of course, they have to be displaced because you can't take over another country and leave the people on the land, and you have to take their land. And so we can see very methodically and systematically the destruction of the Palestinian people really since 1947-48, since the Nakba. And that's really important because that's, in other words, it's whatever arguments there are of whether Gaza itself, what's happening in Gaza today, rises the level of genocide, is really put to bed when you put Gaza within the wider perspective. And we have to also keep attention focused on the West Bank and what's happening. You know, the militarization of the settlers and the expulsion of Palestinians from their villages and the ethnic cleansing of Area C. So that all of this has to be in front of us. And I just have I have a lot more to say, but I'll jump to my conclusion in a way because we only have a few minutes. And that is, I think we should have to stop talking about the two-state solution. This is a real problem. There is no two-state solution. And it's a misunderstanding of what settler colonialism is. And it's the fatal trap that the PLO fell into in 1988 when it recognized Israel. Since its inception in the middle 60s, the PLO had properly defined Zionism as a colonial movement, and it was an anti-colonial resistance movement to liberate Palestine. In 1988, because of all kinds of pressures, it gave up the colonial struggle and began to get into this weird two-state, as if there's some symmetry between the sides, And as if Israel is really ready to take, even 22% of the country it claims and turn it into a Palestinian state. What we're talking about when we talk about the two-state solution is apartheid. It has to be. It has to be. If you look at the facts on the ground that have been created and the whole meaning of settler colonialism, it has to be the state of Israel, as it's recognized by the UN, on 78% of historic Palestine, plus East Jerusalem. For Israel, East Jerusalem is not even negotiable. And that's supported by the international community, especially the United States, plus the major settlements. Israel has 750,000 settlers in the occupied territories in huge settlement blocks going from the north to the south. So all the Palestinians are left with, in the best case scenario, in the so-called two-state solution, is apartheid. And the South Africans should certainly understand this. An island in the north of the West Bank, the West Bank divided by the settlement of Ariel, an island in the center of the West Bank for Palestinians, divided by Greater Jerusalem, Ma'ale Adumim, an island in the south of the West Bank, and Gaza. It is non-sovereign. They have no control of their borders. It's not viable. And therefore, we have, in my view, I'm part of the One Democratic State campaign. We have to start talking about we have to talk about a political solution, a program that's crucial. And I think it should be one democratic state. That aside, it's time to stop talking about the two-state solution. And if genocide is happening with the entire Palestinian population over all of Palestine, the political solution to that is an anti-colonial solution that relates to the Zionist colonial enterprise over all of Palestine and not just certain pieces of it. So I'll leave my intervention there.
Thank you so much, sir. I do apologize for addressing you as American. I would just like to add that it's really, really great to hear from scholars and academics who have challenged the historic narrative and really expounded on settler colonialism. It's really great, and we really do commend academics, or I do personally, who in fact adopted the term apartheid even before NGOs did. I do remember that. So thank you so much for your intervention. I would like to invite next Ibo Mendaza, who is a Zimbabwean academic, author, and advisory council member at FPRI. Mr. Ibo, if you're with us. In the meantime, I suppose I would then invite Ricardo Bocco, an author and emeritus professor of political sociology at the Geneva Graduate Institute. Thank you so much for joining us, please.
Thank you for inviting me. Well, a number of things that I wanted to say have already been aired by previous colleagues, but I would like to dwell on 2 points. The first one is a footnote on what is happening right now in Gaza, or at least the past couple of weeks. The craziness of the situation makes that the US are not capable to impose to Israel the possibility of humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. And in the meantime, they are dropping by air food aid. And it's so ridiculous because the dropping of food aid by air is 7 times more costly than bringing in food by trucks. And by the way, since the trucks have to be inspected by Israeli officers, many reports have been witnessing about the fact that in the humanitarian aid that has to be brought to Gaza, most of the items related to health instrument, health medicines, etc., are forbidden. Now, I think I would like to add, or in a complementary way, develop few items from what Jeff Halper has just said. I fully support all what he has been saying. I strongly agree with him. But I would like to highlight that the complicity of the West, mainly Europe and North America, in the present context in Gaza, echoes a very old complicity of the West, starting from the end of the 19th century. And let's remember that in 1903, when the fifth Jewish International Congress, the fifth one, was brought together, it was the Congress when they decided that Palestine was the place for the Jews. And of course, for the Europeans, they were living at that time a problem, inverted commas, with the Jewish migrants. Between 2 and 3 million Jewish migrants from Eastern Europe were moving progressively to Western Europe up to the US. In 1924, California promulgated a law forbidding the immigration of the Jews. Can you imagine? Meaning that the best way the West thought to solve the problem was to send them all to Palestine. Fine. But now the question of political Zionism, as correctly addressed by Professor Halper, I would like to add that there is not just the political Zionism Jabotinsky way, the right-wing version of political Zionism that was adopted progressively by the Jewish leader during the mandate period and afterwards. There was another trend in Zionism, represented by people like Martin Buber, who in 1946 wrote a very important book titled The Binational State. He and his colleagues and other more important or equally important people like Einstein after him, Hannah Arendt, have been actually saying that we are basically grabbing the lands of the Palestinians. But how can we imagine a coexistence? Martin Buber and his friends were not in a vision of settler colonialism, and their view should be worthwhile to be resumed. And I also do agree with Jeff Halper that the two-state solution is a nonsense. I would like to ask any political decision maker that in this moment is saying that we have to revert back to the two-state solution. There is no two-state solution. Today we have one-state reality, which is the Israeli states in its borders of 1949 and the occupied territories of Gaza and the West Bank, where the Israeli administration has been applying a very sophisticated juridical system for domination and exclusion and discrimination. So starting from this one state reality, how can we think the future? I think, and this is what I've been working during the past year, and by the end of April, there will be a white paper that will be public, is about rethinking the one-state solution. Jeff Halper mentioned the one democratic state, but there are three main models around that. There is the binational state that I mentioned, and the federal state, which is probably a very interesting approach to the question. But I mean, to be short, because I cannot give you all my ideas in a few minutes, the point is that it's time to think to the day after, not in terms of a two-state solution, but in other ways that will include, by the way, the representation and the point of view of the populations concerned. Because so far, everybody is planning for the Palestinians. But who has been asking them what do they think, what do they want for their future? And Hamas, curiously enough, has been the one who has been suggesting that reconvening the Palestinian National Council, which is the legislative or at least the representative body of the PLO, has not been reconvened since 2005. So the point of resuming the role of the PLO Palestinian National Council would be a first starting point for knowing what the Palestinians in Palestine and in the diaspora want. Sorry for being too long, and thank you again for having invited me.
No, thank you so much for your intervention. We are going to have next speaking to us Isa Shivji, who's a Tanzanian author and academic. But before that, I would just like to mention that Michael Binion, who is an English journalist and the Times' Moscow correspondent, was not able to join us, but has sent a recorded message, which we will be showing later on. Mr. Shivji, please.
Yeah, well, once again, like my colleagues, I thank you for giving me this opportunity to reflect together and to agonize together over what we are witnessing in front of our eyes, one of the most atrocious and outrageous killings and massacres of the people in Gaza. Straight away, before even I go into some of the points that I want to make, I would like to help to agree fully with Jeff Harper that the two-state solution is a red herring. The Israelis never believed in it, they never wanted it, and they're just buying time to make even the so-called two-state solution impossible. You cannot have a Bantustan type two states in Israel, in Palestine. Bantustan policy did not succeed in South Africa and did not succeed in Palestine because whole of Palestine is occupied. So it is basically question of not so much coexistence, but common existence, of common citizenship for all inhabitants of the people from river to the sea. Having said that, let me say that what we're witnessing in the genocide in Gaza is a culmination of two tendencies in imperialism. One is war and another is fascism. And we are witnessing today the worst form of both in Gaza. It happened in the Second World War, where you had the Holocaust. At that time, imperialism was the stage of monopoly capitalism. It still had to witness its golden stage, golden period of capitalism. But now capitalism is a financialized capitalism in its declining state. And therefore, what we're witnessing in Gaza is more atrocious than what we witnessed in the Second World War. So it's a culmination of these two tendencies of war and fascism. And what we're witnessing in Gaza is racist Zionist fascism. And Zionism is another manifestation of imperialism, supported by the imperialist countries. My last point would be that, frankly, what is happening in Gaza, we do not have words to describe it. And all the words we are using, humanitarian crisis, humanitarian ceasefire, human rights violations, all these fall far short of what's the reality. Today, what we're witnessing is humanity itself is in crisis. Humanity itself is in crisis. And the question, therefore, for the world, for the peoples of the world, is to how to save humanity. And the only way we can do this is by having in one voice rise in millions all over the world against this fascist imperialism that is going on in Gaza. Gazans are fighting the war for all of us. They are in the front line. And we have a duty to stand by their side. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. That was really, really powerful. I think, especially given, the phrase not coexistence, but common citizenship, it brings to mind the very famous phrase, which is that what they say about Palestine, which is the bride is beautiful, but she is married to another man, as to what people said when they first went to Palestine to think about Jewish immigration. On that note, it would be great if we could have Mr. Mendoza joining us actually now, I think. So it would be great if we could hear from our Zimbabwean author academic and advisory council member. Would we be able to hear from Mr. Ibo Mendoza? I see that you have joined us. That would be great. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Good evening.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you.
Sir, would you be able to, would you be speaking to us today?
Yes.
It would be really great if you could turn on your camera as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Okay. Yeah.
Give me some time. You just carry on and I'll join you just now.
Okay, how about we do the video that we have and then we can hear you right after.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get my stuff all together.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Please take your time.
I have connectivity problems. Yeah.
No worries. Yes, it would be great if we could have the video now. And it is going to be from our Times English journalist and Times' Moscow correspondent, Mr. Michael Bignon.
The tragic situation in Gaza means that there needs to be an immediate ceasefire. It's absolutely dreadful to see the suffering going on now among the civilian population of the Palestinians in Gaza. It's tragic that children are dying, people are starving, aid is not being delivered, and this is an affront to all civilized values. It's inconceivable that the rest of the world should allow this thing to go on without any apparent effort to make a ceasefire immediate and durable. The Americans have responsibility for pushing Israel into accepting a ceasefire straight away. Of course, this is linked to the release of the hostages, and that should happen as well. But there should be no haggling over numbers. This will simply hold up the ceasefire, and it will allow the hardliners in the Israeli cabinet to push for a continuation of the fighting. Any ceasefire should be accompanied by a plan for the future of the Palestinian state and the two-state solution, which the rest of the world has accepted and which Mr. Netanyahu refuses to agree to. The ceasefire should also include an immediate delivery of aid. This is important, and it's tragic that the aid is already being blocked. It's not getting through. The Egyptians have a responsibility to allow more aid to go in from their side. The Israelis need to open the frontier so that more trucks can go in. It's a terrible irony that the Americans are dropping aid by plane, while at the same time, the bombs that are dropping are being supplied to Israel from the Americans. So it just does make no sense at all. The international community must get behind the United Nations and must push for an immediate ceasefire. We've had too many statements from Western leaders and from others that a ceasefire is needed, but nothing is done. there needs to be real pressure on the Israelis and also on Hamas to, first of all, come to an agreement about the immediate release of hostages, and secondly, to implement a ceasefire that is not going to be broken by either side. Until this happens, we'll see still the tragic images that we're now seeing, which are being shown all across the world. The Western media has been quite good at showing what's happening. I say only quite good. More needs to be done to understand the suffering of the people there. And it's important not to mix up anti-Semitism, which is a terrible crime, with criticism of Israel, which is perfectly legitimate. But the focus now must be on an immediate ceasefire, and that must be implemented by all sides. Let's hope we see something positive soon.
Thank you so much. I wonder if Mr. Mendoza would be able to address us.
No, thank you very much. I'm sorry about the delay in connecting. Thank you for this program. I think it's important. I think the tragedy of the Gaza situation has been demonstrated enough. The problem of the genocide and the problem of the occupation. I believe that among the most important developments since 7th of October last year has been the extent to which the Palestinian question has become very, very alive in the global situation. I do believe that things will never be the same again. I do believe that the Palestinian question has become very alive.
Sorry, Selwyn. Sorry, if you could repeat that, your voice got cut off.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, just the last sentence. That would be great.
I believe that we, in a situation in which we now move into a point where the global community has to decide that enough is enough. What we've seen in Gaza, for example, is just too much. Over 30,000 people killed, almost 12,000, 15,000 kids killed. It's completely unacceptable. And that the global community, in particular, those who stand by Israel, are complicit in this tragedy. How do we stop the genocide? How do we end the occupation is the question at the moment. I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you very much. I would just like to invite, with those of our panelists who are still there, if anyone has any concluding remarks, it would be great to hear since we do have a bit of time left. It would be great if we could have a discussion. And I would like to invite, I guess I'll invite someone to start. It would be great if Mr. Halper is still with us. It would be great to hear from you, sir.
To hear from me? Your voice broke up a bit.
Sorry, I said I can lead. It would be great if you could lead the discussion, and yeah, it would be really great.
Well, just just a thought. I think what I mean, the Gaza issue stands on its own, the ceasefire and the end to the genocide and the suffering. And I mean, that's, that it's a standalone thing to some degree. And I'm reluctant to put it within the wider context of Zionism and settler colonialism and what's happening in the rest of the country, not to be misunderstood as trying to minimize or sideline Gaza. I mean, this has to be at the center of our attention. Nevertheless, it is a part of a wider Zionist project that is really entering the stages of completion. And I think the fact that Israel has all the settlements it needs to control the West Bank. It's already locked the Palestinians. Don't forget, even without the refugees, the Palestinians today are the majority population in the country between the river and the sea. And yet they're locked into enclaves on 15% of their land. Israel controls 85%, and it could control 100%, but it can't get rid of the Palestinians. So it's confining them as an apartheid system to that 15%. We're in a mopping up stage, and I think what's more important for the Americans and the Europeans and the pro-Western Arab states is to get back to this process of normalization. They want to counter Egypt. They want to counter China. They want to counter Russian incursions. They want to try to counter the Road and Belt initiative of the Chinese with their India-Middle East corridor. These are the big issues for them. Western hegemony, of which Israel is a key part with its military power. And that's why the Palestinians are a pesky issue for the international community. They want to marginalize the Palestinians. If it hadn't been for the Hamas attack of October 7th, Saudi Arabia would have signed a normalization agreement with Israel, and the Palestinians would have been erased completely as a political force. So I think what Hamas has succeeded in doing is bringing back the Palestinians as a political actor. The problem is, and I'll conclude on this because I don't want to dominate, the problem is that you can't be in a political struggle without an end game, without a political program. And for all kinds of reasons that we can just imagine, we don't have to get into, to cut the Palestinians all the slack in the world, it's very hard for this scattered, dispersed people controlled by so many forces to come together behind a political program. Nevertheless, what I think is clear is that the only program that will decolonize all of Palestine and that will lead to a just and stable kind of resolution is transforming the country into one democratic state. In other words, ending the idea of Israel as a Jewish state. You could not have an ethnically pure state in the 21st century, and to take the entire country, create a civil state, give everyone equal rights, bring back the refugees, of course, and then within that framework, to give meaningful cultural space to the different national identities, Palestinian and Israeli. I mean, there are national entities within this system, but to put the emphasis on building a strong civil state. And that, I think, is the only really way out. And until the Palestinians really do begin, with their support of critical Israelis like me, begin to put forward in the political arena a political program of their own, they're going to be in a very weak situation where, calling for a ceasefire is important, but it's a rearguard action. And we have to be more proactive, and we need the Palestinian lead. And I think that's a part of the struggle that we should be looking at as well.
If I may, please, I fully agree, to a large extent persuaded by the argument that you need to have one unitary state. That makes sense. And that the two-state solution is quite weak. It's Bantu state. I fully understand that. But I think we also have to be realistic and fully understand the challenges before us. given the history and the experience of other political settlement, to have this kind of big bang approach, it might not be palatable. Here you have the hegemonic power, United States that is, has not been persuaded on this particular approach or option. Within Israel itself, the little that one know is that the population hasn't reached that stage. So you're prolonging a struggle for Palestinians to have a big bang approach, as I welcome it. But we're looking for another 50 years or so. So the question is, what then do you do? If Israel wants to destroy Hamas, and what kind of political representation are you going to have? Who is Israel going to negotiate with on the table? I really do not think that the settlement in this matter can be achieved by the international community alone. It has to be the Palestinian and the Israelis, as they are 100% opposed to any negotiations and meaningful for both parties to agree. And therefore, the bigger question is that in the immediate, what is it that we're proposing in the medium and then long term? I think there is a need of cool heads and come with workable approach in which you, in a gradual approach, have buy-in from both parties. As it stands, I really do not see that approach. Big bang, yes, but it remains theoretical in my view. I do not hear it strongly among Palestinians, nor do I hear it strongly among Israeli, other than scholars and well-meaning people, as you're doing, and therefore, what is it for now? What is the immediate solution and how? Thank you.
If I may come in.
Yes, please. I was just about to invite you.
Thank you very much. Look, I think.
Sorry, and we also have Mr. Shivji, if he would like to conclude with final remarks, please, Mr. Laher, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I think this is a very enriching discussion. I fully agree. We need a political process. Ultimately, it's about a political process leading to a just solution for both Israelis and Palestinians. Where we are today and the approach we have taken, which I stressed in my intervention, was the issue of international legality. We have heard over and over again for the last 2 years about this rules-based international system based on international law. We've got to insist that this rules-based system, this supposed rules-based system based on international law, has to be applicable to all. I don't think that we're going to go back to the kind of normalization that we saw before October last year. Things have changed. The global South, but in particular, the fact that we've been able to utilize this same rules-based system that has been utilized by the West and seen as this Western domain, that international law, the institutions that we have for human rights and legality is within the domain of only a few, has been shattered. I think we now see what we saw in the International Court of Justice a few weeks ago on the other matter, the GA referral, where you had more countries approaching the International Court of Justice on a particular matter than ever before. The international human rights groups such as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem, of course, in Israel, that have come up with reports about the conditions in the occupied territories, which they've likened to apartheid-like conditions that we saw in, well, actually, we would say as South Africans, they're much worse than what we experience as in South Africa. This represents a change. And I think it's up to us as the international community, civil society, and governments to ensure that we utilize this moment to emphasize international legality, utilizing the mechanisms that we have at our disposal, whether it is the International Court of Justice or mechanisms within the multilateral framework, including there's been talk about resuscitating the Committee Against Apartheid, for example. These are mechanisms we need to resort to ensure that we do not have this normalization process that was there prior to current developments. But thank you again. I think this is a debate that we need to continue, and we appreciate the views. Thank you.
I would like to raise a question for Professor Halper, if you allow me.
Of course, please go ahead.
Professor Halper, you are sitting in Jerusalem, you are an Israeli Jew, and you know very well your society. So if we talk in the short term, personally, I don't see when and how Netanyahu will be ready to declare a ceasefire. There are several reasons behind that, meaning, well, for personal reasons, if he steps down, he will have to face the trials against him, etc., etc. He is betting in the medium term on the re-election of Donald Trump. But I mean, he's walking on the X, Mr. Netanyahu. But let's suppose that we come to, in one way or another, to a ceasefire. If we come to a ceasefire, I see profiling a big issue for the Israelis, meaning that if the ceasefire is pronounced, I don't think that Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, Israel Katz, and all the extreme right of the President Netanyahu government will be ready to accept it. I mean, they are armed to the teeth, and they want to pursue their messianic project of Eretz Israel. Therefore, if there is a ceasefire, there will be the possibility of an important clash, if not a civil war in Israel between those who want to support the ceasefire and the settlers, the ultra-Orthodox supremacists who want to pursue their project. How do you see the situation since you are living in Israel?
Do we have time for?
Yes, absolutely. Please go ahead. I think we have about 7 to 10 minutes, and that's where we'll have to conclude. But please go ahead.
Well, just to kind of combine a response very quickly to the last two speakers. Again, you know, settler colonialism is a very important framework, because unless you know, if you go to the hospital and you're misdiagnosed, you know, they think you have a cold and in fact you have cancer, it's not good. If we misdiagnose this political situation and come up with some conflict resolution approach or some negotiation or some compromise that really doesn't get to the roots of which is colonialism, then you know, we might get to some short-term immediate sort of arrangement or something, but it's only going to be something that reinforces in the end the apartheid colonial occupation sort of a regime. That's why I'm not being an academic and insisting on some academic framework. This is an important political framework. And in that framework, there is no chance that the Israeli public is ever going to agree to decolonization, certainly to giving up Judea and Samaria, which they call the West Bank, or even to a ceasefire in Gaza, unless somehow it, you know, in a transactional way, it kind of pays off. They get the hostages back or whatever it is. So I certainly can't represent South Africans. I'm not South African, but you know, South Africa is an inspiration for us in your anti-apartheid struggle. And what seemed to me important was that, I mean, talk about a big bang. I mean, nobody thought that apartheid was going to fall. But beyond that, you know, I think the ANC recognized that the vast majority of whites in South Africa were not going to agree to dismantle the apartheid system. Why would they? And so, in a sense, the ANC's strategy was to bypass them, not even go to governments, because governments are hostile, like they are to the Palestinians, but to go to the international civil society, churches, trade unions, universities, intellectual groups, political groups, and so on, and mobilize them, and then do an important, a focused BDS movement, isolate South Africa, and cause the collapse of the apartheid regime. That, I think, is what the Palestinians have to replicate here. The Israelis are never going to agree. You're never going to negotiate with them because, on the contrary, they think they're winning. They, as Professor Boko said, there already is one state. This is really important. The one state idea isn't some long-term visionary kind of a thing instead of a two-state, which seems more immediate. In fact, there already is one state. There's one. I mean, that's the whole point of the South African case, and of the case of apartheid. There already is one governing body over the entire country. So the easy part, it seems to me, is to take the one apartheid state that exists already, that Israel created, and transform it into a state of all its citizens. And in that process, the Israelis, like the whites in South Africa, are not going to be part of the process. We can't allow them to veto, anti-colonial liberation of Palestinians. And therefore, I think we have to replicate what the ANC did. But the ANC always had an end game. It was always one person, one vote. We don't have that with the Palestinian issue. We don't have an end game. Is it two states? Is it one state? And that's what's weakening. That's the fatal flaw, I think, in the Palestinian struggle. They can't mobilize internationally in a focused way and get a political program through unless there is a political program. But that political program, I think, is realistic. I think it reads the situation in the right way of one democratic state. I think it's more doable than the two-state solution. You don't have to dismantle settlements. They all simply become integrated. And at the same time, you can't wait on the Israelis to agree. They're not going to agree. You have to put that into the equation and then move ahead. And I think it has to be Palestinians leading, supported by anti-Zionist Israelis like me, and then to connect up with a political end game to the international civil society, something like the ANC did. And I really do think that that's an effective, and not short term, but I think it's much more doable than some kind of a two-state thing that is not going to decolonize.
Yes, you didn't answer my question. Never mind.
Sorry, why? I was really trying to relate to the Israelis. You were saying the Israelis wouldn't agree to something like that.
No. I said that there is a risk of a civil war in Israel if there is a ceasefire.
No, but there's not going to, no, just in 10 seconds. There will be no ceasefire. Israelis won't agree to a ceasefire. It might be, again, if it's transactional enough. For example, if they get all the hostages back, that's the big thing for most Israelis, there wouldn't be a ceasefire. But if it's not useful for them, or it's not, there will be no ceasefire. There'll either be a ceasefire that all Israelis agree to, which is to get the hostages back, or no ceasefire whatsoever, and total victory, as Netanyahu said. So I don't see any situation in which a civil war is going to emerge, because it's either going to be no ceasefire or agreed upon ceasefire, in my view.
We thank you so much, sir. We only have about 5 minutes left, and I see that Mr. Mendoza and Mr. Shivji are remaining, so it would be really great. I'm really sorry. Of course, this discussion needs more time, and it's been extremely insightful. But if I could please insist on having two last speakers, as Mr. Mendoza and Mr. Shivji, would be really great. Yeah.
Let's start with Ibo Mendoza.
Yes, I see.
Asante mzee wangu. Asante sana, Isa.
Yeah.
The parallels between apartheid South Africa and Israel are useful, but I think we need to re-examine the context. In my view, the apartheid issue was a peculiarly a colonial question. And I think the Palestinian question is more poignantly a colonial question. We need to examine the historical origins of the Palestinian question. It's more recent, 1948. And I think that we are going around about the issue. We are evading the issue. We need to examine the historical origins of the Israeli state clearly. And unless we do that, we are dealing with the symptoms of the problem. The situation in which a whole people, a whole history has been erased temporarily in the form of what we have in the Middle East. We need to go back to the drawing board and examine how and why the Israeli state was set up in 1948. That's the beginning. And I believe the solution is precisely there. We cannot leave things as they are. As much as it looks a difficult question to resolve, I think is precisely there. The Israeli question is a European question. The Europeans set up the Israeli state to salvage their consciences about the extent to which they murdered and slaughtered Jews. But we also need to interrogate what is it that is the Israeli society today? What is the Israeli state? And I think we are evading that question, and I do hope that at some stage, we begin to examine the origins of the Palestinian question more seriously. That's my submission. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Shivji, please, if we could
Yes,
end.
thank you very much. Very briefly, once again, I find myself in total agreement with Jeff Harper. And in fact, I feel that more than ever before, maybe what looked like unrealistic just 10 years ago, now looks more realistic. For the first time in the world, you have a massive support for Palestine and against the state of Israel. And there is a recognition in the international civil society of both that Israel is a colonial settler state and Israel is an apartheid state. Now this year has to be pushed further, therefore, to say that what we have to resolve is a colonial settler question. And that is why it seems to me the argument for common existence, mobilize the international society around that, the way South Africa did, is much more feasible and possible now than ever before. If there's anything that Hamas did, it is that they put back the Palestinian question on the stage on the world stage, and actually, Israeli state is on the defensive. It is almost becoming a pariah state. So I think now the situation is much better for advancing the discourse on a one common democratic state than ever before. Thank you.
I would just like to extend the biggest thanks to everyone who was here and joined us today. It was incredibly insightful for me personally as well. Just the debate was so rich. And yes, please do accept my warmest thank you for joining us today. And hopefully we can continue this conversation and keep our fingers crossed for the ICJ decisions that are coming up. We, of course, cannot end without just a note on the suffering of those in Gaza, especially as there is a famine looming. And yeah, I would just like to end on that note, because whilst political solutions are always there, we must, of course, remember and express our solidarity with those who are innocent victims of this conflict. Thank you so very much to everyone who joined us today. And we can end right there. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
you.
Asante, asante.